Oh my gosh, what's up, suckers? How was your 2021? Don't answer that question. 2021 is gonna be whatever 2021 is gonna be, and I'm gonna leave it, whoever it is, in the dust behind me. I read 53 books this year, which I'm so proud of. That's like a book a week, a little bit more than a book a week, and I read some big books this year. I hope that you guys read some good books this year. I hope I can put you guys on. I really hope I can put somebody on something on this list, because these really did it for me this year. To make things interesting, I forced myself to rank them, even though like my initial instinct is to not rate them just because I love them all. But just to make things a little more interesting, I put the pedal to the metal. I forced myself to rank them. So the number 10 pick of 2021 is Omen Raw by Victor Pelevin. My youthful dreams of the future were born from the gentle sadness of those evenings, and you can see the first stars in the east. I hadn't seen or experienced very much, but I liked a lot of things, and I thought that a flight to the moon would take in and make up for all the things that I had passed by, in hopes of catching up with them later. How could I know that you only ever see the best things of life out of the corner of your eye? So Omen Raw is this kind of awesome, weird, dark, funny Russian novel set around this kid whose name is Omen Raw, whose dream is to be a cosmonaut. And it's really the center of his life. It's the center of all his energies. And when he finally gets the chance to basically pursue his dream and it falls kind of in his lap, he's confronted with a lot of different questions and kind of confronted with the reality that his dream, or everything he's kind of hyped up this life he wants to be, might not really be what he thinks it is. And it's super funny. It's really dark. It's kind of twisted. Like, think of, Kurt Vonnegut, but make it Russian, and we have Omen Raw. This book really has stayed with me through the entire year. It's one of the first books that I read in 2021, and it just inspired a lot out of me. The prose was absolutely beautiful. I really, really like Victor Pelevin's style. I like his flow. I like his structure. I just liked it. This book, like I said, it inspired a lot out of me. Like, I didn't even kind of realize until like after the fact, but I ended up doing 2 pieces of art that were like based on this book. And then I named one of my Spotify playlists after this book. Like, I didn't kind of realize how it all added up until like a little bit later. I'm like, oh, I kind of did all that surrounding this book. I'm planning to do a video where I show like kind of all the art that I've done that's inspired by stuff I've been reading. But yeah, this was totally part of that this year, and it was just so cool. I know Victor Pelevin kind of has his own little following, but this is not very widely known or like widely discussed, and I hope that this video can inspire somebody to pick up Omen Raw. And this is like an amazing cover also. This is like probably one of my favorite covers on my shelves, but it's awesome, it's sick, and yeah, you gotta read Omen Raw. All right, guys, we're getting into it. We're getting into the thick of it. So for my number 9 pick of 2021, it is going to Graceland by Chris Abani. Ooh, White sand and fine glittering silicone chips clung to him, catching the sun, turning him into a patchwork fabric of diamonds and ebony. This was one of the, thematically, like one of the hardest books that I had to read this entire year. It was like quite literally torturous at sometimes. I'm like not joking. So if you don't have the stomach, like, I wouldn't go straight into a book like this, but it was, to say the least, amazing. This book is set in the ghettos of Lagos, Nigeria during the 80s, I believe, which obviously is a very tumultuous and desperate, violent, crazy place and time to live. And we're following a young teenager who is so full of heart and so full of hope and so full of passion, whose name is Elvis, whose dream is to basically follow his passion of being a dancer and kind of make his way up and out of this very tough life that he's been born into. And Chris Abani himself was born in Nigeria and became a political prisoner at the age of 16 and suffered like severe political persecution after he published a novel. Like literally a 16-year-old published a political novel that kind of got him into some trouble. He became a prisoner. He eventually found asylum in England. But yeah, so if that just doesn't give you a clue about kind of how powerful this book is, then, you know, I don't know what will. This book kind of has a lot to do with kind of like this cross-pollination of cultures between like America and Africa, and kind of like this vision of how they view America and how like American culture has really influenced like a lot of the way they live and the entertainment that they consume, and kind of all this cool stuff. Like the main character's name is Elvis, and it was so gripping. Like from page one, I was so into it. I was so invested in Elvis as a character and so invested in like wanting to see him succeed. Like I was rooting for this kid. The prose is absolutely sparklingly brilliant. Chris Abani is also a poet, which comes through so clearly and so crisp in his prose. I marked so much. I couldn't even really choose what quote I wanted to read because some of them are so good and some of them I was like, oh my gosh, I can't read a whole page of his writing, but I wanted to. I really did. This book is also very tough to read at times and really gives you like a front seat view into kind of like the political turmoil of Nigeria. I also got to learn a little bit more about the Biafran Civil War, which my dad actually lived through as a 5 or 6 year old. And I don't know much about it because he wouldn't really talk about it that much. He and his whole village actually became refugees and were kind of on the move. And the one thing I do know about that time is that he was forced to eat his dog. But yeah, I got to learn a little bit more about that, and there was just a lot of amazing stuff going on in this book, and a very poignant, kind of devastating, sad, but also hopeful look into Lagos, Nigeria, one of the, you know, metropolises of all of Africa, and I loved it. All right, guys, my number 8 pick of 2021, and that is Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. My mother's favorite thing to say to me was, "I am not your friend." She'd often say, "You are my firstborn son, my only son," as a reminder not to die. This is the only short story collection that made it onto my 2021 list because it was just all that. This is probably, I'm kind of leaning towards saying this is the best collection of stories that I've ever read, and it was absolutely brilliant. This book has been described as Black Lives Matter meets Black Mirror, and that's a awesome description. This book focuses in on African American main characters and kind of also has this really cool sci-fi element to it, magical realism, speculative fiction, and it doesn't only deal with like African American social issues and things like that, but it also has this like very American backdrop. There's a lot of stories in here that focus on kind of like the place of consumerism in our lives. Like there's this one really cool kind of thread of stories. A couple of the characters and stuff overlap, but not all of them are very explicitly connected. Where Black Friday is kind of like a sport, a very kind of bloody, scary, murderous craze. There's so much stuff in this book was so smart. The other thing about this short story collection is that it was a hit every time. How many stories are in here? I think there's 12, and all of them were just as amazing as the next. You know what I'm saying? There's so many short stories collections. It's a hard thing to do because it's like always like that one was good, that one wasn't, that one was good. I like no, every story I was invested in, It really is such a talent to be able to write a good short story. You have such a limited amount of time to do what people do in like full-length novels to get you invested, to get you to care. And Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, he did it. I am so excited to, he's a young writer too, I believe, and I'm like so excited to like follow his career and to see what else he's gonna produce, because I know it's gonna be amazing. If you're looking for a good short story collection to read, like please pick up Friday Black. When I was reading this, I was very consumed. I was very consumed with this. I actually was like at a comedy show that I paid a lot of money for, and I like till the very second that the comedian came on stage was huddled in my seat reading this book. For my number 7 pick of 2021, that spot goes to I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. Jake isn't striking, not really. He's handsome mostly in his irregularity. He wasn't the first guy I noticed that night, but he was the most interesting. I am rarely tempted by stainless beauty. I loved this book. Ian Reid was my king for like a week after I read this book. The atmosphere was absolutely amazing, to the point that it was almost tangible. There was a point when I was reading this book that I kind of refused to keep reading it because it was nighttime or it was dark outside and I was too scared. This is a very masterfully done psychological thriller following a couple, a man named Jake and then an unnamed narrator, the girlfriend who we're kind of experiencing the story through, as they're on their way to meet, she's on her way to meet Jake's parents at this isolated little farmhouse, and she's kind of contemplating whether she wants to continue this relationship. From page 1, I said the atmosphere was absolutely tangible. Like nothing was very explicitly wrong, you know, but you just knew something was not quite right. The twist blew me out of the water. Did not see it coming. It deals with so many kind of interesting philosophical conversations that were going on about like how well you can really know someone, and kind of explored some themes of like loneliness and the need for connection and just all these really amazing topics. It was done so well. Trigger warning for this book. I don't want to say what the trigger warning is because I don't want anything to be spoiled, but just, I don't know, maybe do a slight bit of research into it before you just dive straight in. But I was just so impressed. Also really liked the movie. Charlie Kaufman just did a brilliant job interpreting the story. And yeah, that's my number 7 pick. Number 6 pick, Fernando Pessoa and Company by the man himself, Fernando Pessoa, translated and curated by Richard Zenith. I feel like vomiting, and like vomiting my own self. I feel a nausea such that if I could eat the entire universe to throw it up into the sink, I'd eat it. If you don't know exactly the feeling that Fernando Pessoa is talking about, click off this channel right now. I have talked about Fernando Pessoa, like, I think kind of a lot on this channel so far, even though I don't really have that many videos, because he just stays winning. He was this prolific poet and prose writer who died in almost complete obscurity, and his work is still making its way to the light. Not all of it has even been released. He left this huge trunk full of all his amazing literary talent and observations that has not even all fully been sorted through and released, and I can't wait to keep following him. I first discovered him through the Book of Disquiet, which is one of my top 10 books of my entire life. He wrote through all of these heteronyms, which is a term that he actually coined himself, where he basically had a fully fleshed out biography for all these different pieces of himself. All of them had a different birthday, different ages, and he wrote through them as them. And this one is a couple of his poets. These are 5 poets that he wrote through, and so all of these sections are kind of written by a different poet. And Fernando Pessoa just means so much to me. He's so deep, he's so sad, what I really appreciate is like how unafraid he is to explore all the different parts of himself, which is why he kind of obsessively split himself up into all these heteronyms, because he knows that within all of us, we contain multitudes, and him reading him is so satisfying because of kind of how contradictory he is, and that surprisingly is what makes it so satisfying, because he like fully commits to so many different pieces of himself, even if those pieces of himself are not synonymous or they don't align. And I am just stay impressed with him. I have been reading him for years. I will continue to read him. I am hoping to reread the Book of Disquiet soon and do a translation comparison between the Penguin edition by Richard Zenith and then the other one written by I forgot who translated it. You just can't go wrong by reading Fernando Pessoa. Like, you literally can't do it. Well, let's get into the top 5, y'all. We're getting to the top 5. So my number 5 book that I read this year goes to Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. She knew the world was a stallion rolling in the blue pasture of ether. She knew that God tore down the old world every evening and built a new one by sunup. The familiar people and things had failed her, so she hung over the gate and looked up the road towards way off. She knew now that marriage did not make love. Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman. I read this book at the exact moment that I needed it this year. Something happened in my personal life that was just kind of very disconcerting to me and disheartening, and I just needed to read a book about a powerful Black woman. This is a very famous piece of African American literature. So basically, this 1937 beloved classic follows a amazing, wonderful protagonist named Janie as she kind of navigates her life in the South for self-fulfillment, self-actualization, romantic love, kind of like this interesting mesh. She's just on a personal journey. It was just so satisfying to just read about a Black woman on a personal journey. Richard Wright, who's one of her contemporaries who was writing with her during the Harlem Renaissance, actually criticized this book for quote-unquote not being political enough, basically, and that just irks me. It makes me feel some type of way, because this Black woman writing about self-actualization and love and the personal inner life of a Black woman is political, in my opinion. And the fact that she was criticized for this book in any way, shape, or form is just, I can't believe another Black man would tell that to my sister. But I think I said when I reviewed this one in my wrap-up, this is some of the best prose I have ever read in the entire English language. The woman can write. She can write. And this book made me sob, like cry so hard. I was so emotionally affected. And I'm just so happy that this book came into my life just at the right time. And if you haven't read this book yet, like, this is your sign. You need to pick up Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. My number 4 book that I read in 2021 was the one and only Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Here you have the end of the world, an anchorage, a quiet haven, the navel of the earth, the 3 fishes that are the foundation of the world, the essence of pancakes, of savory fish pies, of the evening of samovar, of soft sighs and warm shawls and hot stoves to sleep on, as snug as though you were dead, yet you're alive. Dostoevsky is, like, officially this year really cemented it. One of my favorite writers of all time. I don't really think I need to hype up Dostoevsky. He has his place in, the literary canon for a reason. I have a whole video of me basically just gushing about Crime and Punishment, but if you don't know what this book is about, we follow this very interesting character whose name is Raskolnikov, who is kind of leading a very tough life, and a life that is tough in a very unfair way, as a lot of people in 19th century Russia had it. And basically he decides to kind of test the bounds of his own morality. The means can kind of justify the ends, because if you do something bad, doing something good with what you did bad, or because of the thing you did bad, it kind of cancels each other's out. So he kind of goes on this very personal journey. This book, like every Dostoevsky, was a religious experience. It was just absolutely riveting. Dostoevsky is really like no other. You know, I just am so in love with not only his writing and the questions that he explores, but who he was as a man. I have a whole video about my little itty bitty thoughts about Crime and Punishment, but Dostoevsky just satisfies me on so many levels. Like, reading his book just really does everything that I want good literature to do. You know, he takes me to the depths of my own soul. He makes me think. He makes me question my own, you know, morality. He's truly amazing. There's no one like Dostoevsky. All right, y'all, this is it. This is the creme de la creme. This is my top 3 books of 2021. And number 3, very rightly so, goes to Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. What he wanted most was what he could never have, for it not to have happened, any of it. Better far never to have known the pleasure than to have the pain that followed. Maggie had been a weak woman, and yet her weakness had all but slaughtered his strength. Sometimes just the thought of her made him feel that he shouldn't pretend to lead men anymore. This book really surprised me. McMurtry, he won me over with this book. I, once again, have its own review for it, so if you want to hear more in depth my thoughts about that, you can watch that. But basically, we are following these 2 older rangers who are kind of the center of the story, but there's many other side characters. I don't really want to call them side characters because they were all so important and so well written that they didn't even really feel like side characters, to be honest. But these 2 older rangers named Gus and Call, who are kind of like the opposites of each other, who have this kind of long running 35 plus year friendship, decide to go on a cattle drive up to Montana, which is a journey of like 3,000 plus miles. And they go on this kind of crazy journey. This is a thick book, as you can see, 800 plus pages. I'm so mad that I didn't pick this up sooner, just because I had kind of come up with these ideas about what I thought this book was about, which really this book was not about at all. It's really a very poignant and interesting look into uncolonized America and this kind of idea of the wild, wild west, without it being like romanticized. The women were so well written, which I just have to give props to McMurtry. The people of color were so well written. I was just so impressed by all the turns that this book took, how memorable and consuming the story is. Like, I never thought that me as a young Black girl could relate so hard to like these old white men living in this very specific time in America, yet I did. This book made me feel so many emotions. It made me cry. It legitimately made me laugh. This book is just really does deserve its place as kind of like a modern classic. McMurtry kind of just blew me away with Lonesome Dove. If you are kind of not sure whether Lonesome Dove is gonna be your thing, you know, you've heard about it, but you just don't know, like, you just need to go in. You just need to go in. You need to read Lonesome Dove. It was an absolute delight to be able to experience this story, and I am so happy that I finally took the dive and that all these characters are now part of my life. And this book was so many things, and I'm not really selling it hard enough, I don't think. So if you want to hear a little bit more about what I think about it, again, I have its own separate review, but this book definitely has a special place in my heart. And yeah, it made my my number 3 pick of 2021. My number 2 pick of 2021 goes to Walden by Henry David Thoreau. White Pond and Walden are great crystals on the surface of the earth, lakes of light. If they are permanently congealed and small enough to be clutched, they would, perchance, be carried off by slaves like precious stones to adorn the heads of emperors. But being liquid and ample and secured to us and our successors forever, we disregard them and run after the diamond of Cornor. What Henry David Thoreau did in this book is like my ultimate fantasy. He went off and built his own cabin in the woods and just chilled out for 2 years, and not in like a lazy, selfish way. It was this really kind of great exploration of self and the things that society deems important and what's really important. This book is like philosophical, but mostly I just feel like it's personal. This contains some of the greatest nature writing ever recorded in the English language. I really like tumultuous, dark reads. Like, it's just where my taste is leading me at this point of my life. But this one, out of all the books I read this year, was the one that I think bring me the most peace, and I think gave me the most joy, because I really felt like I was just in the woods surrounded by nature. This book also very unexpectedly made me cry towards the end, which I really truly wasn't expecting. I just really ate this book up. It meant a lot to me reading it. It felt special. It felt pure. It was just beautiful. It was a beautiful read. Henry David Thoreau is so introspective, and he was so talented, and not only that, he's kind of funny. He says like a lot of like kind of interesting takes and interesting observations, and I just loved this book so much. I felt like this book to me was like walking through a portal and just escaping, not just in like a fun, flippant kind of way, but it felt prolific. It felt important. It felt like I was learning something about myself. I was learning about other people. There were a couple points where I was like, oh, okay, come on, Henry. I felt like sometimes he was a little bit harsh on his judgment of other people, but I think the last chapter especially kind of erased all those thoughts that I had, or that I thought he was kind of thinking about other people. If you haven't read this, you just need to. It feels right, especially in this time of history, especially, you know, in America, just like kind of how bogged down we are by our jobs and the material things around us and our cities and all this stuff. Like, this is something that everybody should read. I know this is one of those books that I'm going to be reading over and over and over again. By the way, I picked this up from a library book sale, and as if this book was not good enough, I found $20 stuck between the pages. Okay, guys, this is it, the moment you've all been waiting for. My number one read, and it goes to The Fated Sun trilogy by C.J. Cherryh. Somewhere out there was the bottom of the world, where all motion stopped forever, and that no place grew yearly, eating away at the world. This is just one of the most immersive books that I've read in my entire life. C.J. Cherryh is my one of my favorite authors of all time, and definitely my favorite science fiction author. This is just a beautiful book, and when I tell you that this book was fate, it really was, because this kind of cover, I don't know, the cover art doesn't really appeal to me. And while I do read sci-fi, I don't know if I ever would have really picked up this book based on the cover or even the blurb on the back. But basically, it was a blind book date at Barnes & Noble. And the paper just said, or in this sci-fi, humans are the enemy. And I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I don't even really buy new books because once they're very expensive. So everything kind of tumbled together, and I ended up having this on my shelves. And basically absolutely blew me to smithereens. This book follows 3 races of aliens, including humans. We have humans, we have this kind of warrior called the Mri, And then we have this kind of other creature called Regal. And this book is really a kind of a culture clash type of novel. Basically, the Regal have been using the Mri to fight a war. They're kind of like hired mercenaries, and they've been hired to fight this 40-year-long war with the humans. So the Regal kind of decide to surrender to the humans, and part of this peace treaty that they make includes the planet of their kind of hired mercenaries called the Mri, which kind of who've already been very devastatingly affected by the effects of the war, and a lot of the race has been itself wiped out. This kind of sets into motion a whole long string of events. CJ Cherryh is not only a great world builder, CJ Cherryh is not only a great storyteller, CJ Cherryh is also an amazing writer, which is something I find so hard to kind of merge when it comes to science fiction. It's like either a great story and a great world, but the writing's subpar and the characters are subpar and they're just not quite there. CJ Cherryh really married everything that I want in science fiction and like handed it to me on a platter. It has like this really kind of slow burn, unlikely friendship, which is always super heartwarming to me. It has action, it has a beautiful setting. I believe we're on like a desert planet, which is, you know, kind of like Dune vibes. There's these amazing creatures in here called Duce, which have this really interesting kind of backdrop, and there's just so much going on in this book, and it was so satisfying. I can't explain kind of what kind of reading experience this was for me. I just want to pick it up right now and start reading it. CJ Cherryh is amazing when it comes to kind of creating different cultures. It really kind of made me examine not just like this cool science fiction world that she was building, but also kind of the divide that people have with each other and what they mean and how we see each other and what that means to like the relationships we form. And it just made me examine so many other things that go so much deeper than a cool science fiction story. She is so good at creating kind of these cultures that are very like fleshed out and very real and so different from each other that you can really see the differences in how all of them see the world and how that makes it difficult for them to get along or to really see eye to eye. I'm not doing it justice. It just has this very special place in my heart, and it is like literally my mission to rally people to read CJ Cherryh, because while she has her own kind of fan base that's going, her readership has not reached as wide as some like bigger sci-fi authors, and she's so talented on so many different levels, and I just need more people to pick her up and to read her. And so that's why this was my #1 book of the year. Even just holding it just makes me feel some type of way. Like I just want it close to my body. Okay guys, so those were my top 10 books of the year. Hopefully this video wasn't like super long, but even if it was, I kind of don't care, because if any video I get to sit here and pontificate about all the amazing things I read this year, it's gotta be this one. I hope you guys also had like an amazing reading year. You know, the year's kind of sucky, but I can always just count on books. Like no matter what life is going to be, I know I can for sure count on a good read. I want to know what your guys' top 10 books of the year were, or some of your favorites. And as always, happy reading, losers.